At Dubbo TAFE, we've got Rob Cohen, Connie Ah-See and Rod Towney, and they're here to talk about their kinship ties, their family mob,
links.
And their links, and just yarn with us for a little while. So, if you
thank you, Diane. We three are related. As you can see, we all look alike. We are Wiradjuri descendants of the Gilgandra mine mission outside Peak Hill, which was one of the biggest Aboriginal missions in the state of New South Wales back then. So we have myself, young Rod Towney, and we have
young Connie Ah-See from Wellington,
and Rob Cohen from Peak Hill.
We are very proud of our heritage, and we carry all stories with us that we would like to talk to you about, some of those, and how our families interrelate. And I might ask young Connie to start.
Before we start talking about stories, we thought this would be a good example of showing when you go through the kinship game, you'll come across where we pass the string across to different aspects of country and kinship. But this is our kinship. We talk about Gilgandra and Peak Hill, but Rodney would have grown up around Gilgandra
and Wellington.
I grew up around Wellington.
And I grew up around Peak Hill.
Peak Hill. But they're our traditional kinship lines, if I can put it that way. And that's why we thought it was important for us three to sit here and talk about that sort of kinship, the strong bonds that we have.
In our family, my family goes through, the name's Cohen, my family goes through the West, and the Towneys, and also the Wright. So we're actually connected to a lot of families on both sides of my grandmother and grandfather. And the Cohen name comes from a Jewish grandfather who his line went up through the Jewish community in Mudgee, but his grandmother, his mother was an Aboriginal lady, but they took the Cohen name. So that's my link to Rodney and Connie.
And my link to these two guys is through the Towney bloodline. The Ah-See name comes from my grandfather's side, from the Chinese.
I've got Asian too, sis, don't worry.
We're related that way also, so.
Yep.
Yeah, but then now you're related to the two men.
Through the Towney side, so that's our strong links.
Connie's mother, my father, and Robert's grandmother were all... Connie's mother, my father, and Robert's great-grandmother were all brothers and sisters. On my mother's family, the Naden clan group came out of the Condobolin Moree area around Condobolin on the Kaladi River. And there was a lot of crisscrossing across country, and some of my mother's family ended up on the Gilgandra mission, and the Towney side and a number of the Nadens lived on Gilgandra mine many years ago, and that place is still there today. Is that correct, Mr. Cohen?
It is. It was handed back to the community in 1994, I think it was. The deeds were actually handed to my grandmother, who was the last, at that time, living person that resided on, that came from the mission. She moved off the mission when she was about 12. Met my grandfather when she was 15, 16, and married him. He's from Condo, and that's where they then moved around and moved on to Mission and actually picked up on the hill in Peak Hill, up near the mines where the mines are. In Humpies, in railway tents, and I vaguely remember those places when I was a kid, because we used to go up there and play with about 3 or 4. And then we actually lived in one of the first families to actually be given a house on the new Mission along with Park Road, 4 new houses. And 4 families, Boyd, the Keeds, the Reeds, the Cohens, and another Keed family, I think it was, were given those 4 houses.
So from Gilgandra mine, as Robert said, families moved into the outskirts of Peak Hill and later in around Peak Hill itself. Connie's grandmother, Auntie Laura Ah-See, or Towney as she was, married Uncle Jack Ah-See in Wellington. So she then moved up and raised her family on the Wellington town common. Is that correct, Connie?
Nan was actually born on the town common. There's a tree there, like I said in one of my other interviews, that they put it on a heritage listing. So she was actually born out there. My mother, all of her sisters and brothers were all born out at Common. I think the only one that was born in the hospital was Auntie Nolan, and she was born on the steps of the hospital. But a good example of kinship here is, he's the eldest, I'm the second eldest, and this is the baby amongst the 3 of us. Because we were living in those different towns didn't mean we lost contact or lost our kinship to each other and our responsibilities to each other. He still doesn't make me a cup of tea, but I make him one. But we still got that strong bond and of who we are.
And I noticed Rob brings you coffee.
Yes.
So he does that as a younger one.
Well, it's respect. Yes, it's a respect thing. You're always told when we were kids to respect your elders, regardless
Not that
whether
much.
they're family.
But it's not.
But it's that reciprocal responsibility.
If you forget something,
They look after you, but then you look after them back. It's in different ways, but it's still happening.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. Because, like I said, as a young fella, you always grew up, taught to respect who your elders were, whether they were family or not, whether they're uncles. Everybody's always an aunt or an uncle that's older than me, and you got a clip around the ears if you didn't do that. So, a lot of young fellas today don't actually do that. It's something that I think we've lost over generations. Is that respect, and we need to get it back.
The beauty about us 3 working together is that he's my boss, we're still related, we still lean on each other, but I still cop it from these 2 if I do the wrong thing at Yarra. I still cry on their shoulders if I need support, but I'll also offer these 2 support as well. Part of that kinship, we have a job to do. Yes, we're employed by the department. We've got to do our job, and they make sure that I do my job. And they'll pull me into line. No questions asked. And I'll argue with them.
Well, it's all about compliance. And because we may be related, we still need to do the job. And I don't like half-baked jobs. And we are professionals, all professionals. We all are very well educated in the white man's sense with degrees, and that's recognised not only with us, but with Auntie Di sitting here and others around in our communities as well. If I can just go back to Gilgandra mine, how the families then fanned out. Our walking tracks, if I can look at it that way, had gone from, on my mother's side, right down to Avalon, Condobolin, back to Peak Hill, and then the Towney group, or clan group, from there across to Wellington and up to Orange, because out around Spring Hill. There used to be a big camp there, and our grandmother on my father's side is buried up at Orange, and I understand there's some other older people as well. So Condobolin, down to Lachlan, down to Peak Hill, down to Bogan, down from Wellington and up towards other side of Burrendong Dam to down to Dubbo, up to Gilgandra. That's basically where people moved around then on my mother's side, because my grandfather, Pastor Naden, many years ago was an Aboriginal preacher. He went up as far as Pilliga and lived there for a season, then came back and settled in Balladoran, which is just outside Gilgandra.
Yeah. So when you look at connection to country, it's not just the place that you were born in or the place where your family comes from. You have these connections to quite a few towns and that through marriage lines and through kinship ties. So it's not just one part of the country, it's several parts of the country that is your traditional lands. It's not just one.
It is. And look, as a kid we used to travel around a fair bit, visiting the families. You have to go to Wello, Gil, Condo, those sort of places a fair bit, visiting family, knowing who we were connected to, because even though transport was hard back then, because hardly ever had a car, when we did get a car, we were able to get around and see the family. And through sports as well, you know, when you grow up in a town playing football in a small town, you get to know, playing against other towns, you get to know your mob on a football field. Because you start talking after the game and making connections. And I'm still making them today. There's a lot of people out there that you run into and you start tracking back and say the whole thing, where you come from, cars, that sort of thing.
And there's certain spots where you wouldn't go to certain towns without going to see your mob.
Oh, exactly. Right? Oh, they'd take you out to drive if you didn't. So, it's about courtesy, it's about respect, dropping in.
Responsibility,
all of that. Yeah. Since I was born in Willow, I've moved across the Peak, and that's where I grew up. But, I could have grown up in any one of these towns around here, had probably a stronger connection with that mob, but you don't lose sight of where you come from in this whole area, even though Peak Hill, very proud, Bogan River, we call ourselves Red Dust, Muddy River people, that sort of stuff. I know that these fellows are part of that as well, although they're very, very, they love Nanima, they love, that mish. That's where they grew up, the common, that's where they grew up, and mine's Peak Hill. So even though we've got these connections, we're still in a local area that we grew up with and that we're connected to in a way. So some places, I'm trying to say, some places do hold nearer to us than probably others. Yeah,
well, some places are really like, I'm on my country. And but you can still go to other places and still feel that same I'm on my country, but you're still glad to get back to that one place where you know that you belong there at that spot, but you know that you can go out and also belong at these other places as well because of the family ties.
Oh, exactly. Family's a big difference when you've got mob there. Because I'm related to Uncle Roy Barker, who's an only Jude who's since passed away. Maybe we got the breed years ago, but she's my grandmother's first cousin. We always had a connection with them. So when they moved up there, it was like, that's Gamilaroi, so it's a different country, but you still felt like welcome up there because you visited them and so forth.
And Auntie June she had a lot of connections in our country. Even at Dubbo, she came when we had reunions and stuff, and it was like being home there as well for her. So she had all these connections.
She's come, so
So she had all these connection with family in Wiradjuri Country as well. So, and when we went up there to see her up Wellington Ridge or that, she was always glad or happy to see her.
And look, people like Uncle Roy don't do that. They did a lot for the community, but just the arts they're into and the crafts they're into really sort of, stuck out. It's like old Uncle Fred Powell too. He used to do a lot of that over in Dubbo, you see. We're connected, to the Powells through that way. So, when you delve into it, there's
right across that.
It's everywhere.
It's important that when we're trying you get someone new come to town, and the first question they ask, who's your mother's mother? Who's your mother? because through the Wiradjuri, it's through the matriarchal line, and you often hear about most of us talking about our mother's line, mostly, and not our father's line. That's the reason for that, but we still link in with our dads as well. It's also important for me that myself, my family, all know who their bloodlines are. That to stop that intermarrying stuff that happens. It's prevalent today, but back in our day it wasn't so much. So my kids need to know who all their family are, all the connections. So when they were growing up, we travel around a bit, so they would know who their people are. Our families, particularly the younger ones now, are dispersed, and they're all over country. And when I say country, I'm talking about all over Australia.
Yeah, and we get some of those little fellas that were lost or stolen, and they come back and they find they're really drawn to a person, or the opposite sex or whatever. They're really drawn to that person, and they don't really understand it, and they mistake it for building a relationship between a man and a woman instead of realising that that's a family connection, and that joy of meeting someone is joy of meeting family, and they misinterpreted those feelings that they're drawing on.
It's true.
So, and then you get close cousins marrying where they shouldn't be.
So young Robert over here, he moved away, went over to the coast, became sort of salt water for a while, and I don't know why he came back again.
Well, that's what kids are. That's what they are born and raised in around the Wyong Gosford areas, which is Darkington area, and they take their mother's line, which is Gamilaroi, because she's Gilgandra, around that way, which sort of pains me a little bit because I'm Wiradjuri, I'm proud Wiradjuri, always have been. But my sons talk about tattoos and they talk about putting Gamilaroi on their arms and so forth. But I can't argue with it, it's their mother's line. And as what said, it's the matriarchal side that we follow.
Yours on that?
Thanks.
But my dad, because my dad brought us up to hold both sides as important, the mum and the dad side. So we wouldn't have dared went to the grandparents on either side and said we held one side more important than the other. We would have been cut down.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, thank you for that. Is there anything else you would like to add, or?
Oh no. Well, I suppose the old saying goes is that you pick your friends, but you can't pick your family.
Yeah.
And that's.
I think what we wanted to get across is the importance of kinship and connections of who you are and where you come from. And
I think that's something that the schools still don't understand, is that the children have got to move around to keep those family ties, those connections, because it's such a strong pull.
Well, it is.
To go and see. If they say you need to come and visit us, then you've got to go and visit them. What they need to do is set up connections between the schools so that the kids can move between those towns and know that they can just go straight into the schools.
But it was the same within the school. Remember how they used to have them segregated, the infants up there and the primary down there, and your little brother and sisters are up there and they want to come down and see you, and they don't realise that there's, even your cousins that are up there need to come down and see you.
Well,
they didn't realise that connection.
I was lucky last year to go to New Zealand, and I went to a Maori school over there, language school, and the little fellas, preschool and younger, that were at the school, they were allowed to walk out of the class and go into the big brothers and sisters classrooms, sit there and watch what they were learning and then they could go back to their classroom when they wanted to. And
sells them down.
them little fellas, they just went in and then they went back to their classroom. Once they checked on their big brother and sister, knew they were okay, and they knew where they were and seen what they were doing, then they went back to their classroom. They were really happy.
The other important thing about families in schools, you have the senior Aboriginal children who are in years 11 and 12, and you have the junior ones. You will often find that the senior ones are still looking after their younger siblings right down to kindergarten.
And they still got that responsibility for the young ones.
And you see that happens a lot. And when the senior school started operating in Dubbo, that in some ways affected some of our kids, because the little ones were away in another school, and that gap was there, but the connection, the relationships were very strong and they couldn't keep their eye on it. It caused some issues with some of them.
Yeah, the big ones couldn't keep on the little ones to keep them out of trouble.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for allowing me to interview you.
Just send Bill to here.
No, Bill. Love, for love.